Before the story starts, I need to ask you for one small thing. This channel is new, and my goal is simple. Reach the first 1,000 subscribers. If you like real stories about power, work, and quiet revenge, help me get there. Subscribe now, because this story proves one thing very clearly. When people think they control you, they stop seeing the trap they are standing on. I didn't plan revenge. I planned survival. Revenge came later, when someone confused access with ownership. My name doesn't matter yet. What matters is what I do. I am an independent transportation systems consultant. For over 20 years, companies have called me when their logistics break, when trucks stop moving, when schedules collapse, and when executives realize that dashboards don't move cargo, systems do. I don't work for companies. I don't join teams. I build systems, and I lease access to them. That difference is everything. I learned it years ago, long before this story began. I spent part of my life in uniform, managing supply routes where mistakes didn't cost money, they cost lives. After that, civilian work felt simple, just louder and more arrogant. When Apex Freight Solutions contacted me, they were already bleeding, especially across their main Memphis freight corridor. Missed audits, frozen permits, trucks sitting idle while managers argued over screens that showed nothing useful. Their operations chief at the time was an old-school guy, someone who understood reality, not buzzwords. He didn't ask for miracles. He asked for stability. I spent months building a system that actually worked, routes that adjusted in real time, dock assignments that didn't collide, traffic coordination that respected the real city, not a spreadsheet version of it. I wrote every line myself. I designed the logic, the controls, the hardware links. And in the contract, I did what I always do. I kept ownership. They paid for use, not for my brain. For years, everything ran perfectly. No drama, no surprises. Money came in on time. The system did its job quietly. Then leadership changed. That's always when problems begin. The new CEO arrived with confidence instead of understanding. She saw my invoice and didn't see a system holding the company together. She saw a cost. To her, anything external was temporary, replaceable. She didn't ask how the system worked. She didn't ask who owned it. She assumed that because the company depended on it, the company controlled it. That assumption was her first mistake. Her emails were clean, polite, and dangerous. Requests for reviews, requests for documentation, requests for copies. Not because she wanted to learn, but because she wanted to take. When she finally told me they were bringing everything in-house, she thought the conversation was over. She believed software lived on servers she could access. She believed control came from titles. She believed experience could be transferred with files. She didn't understand that the system wasn't just code. It was architecture. It was logic. It was a spine she never saw. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I didn't warn her. I simply prepared. Because when someone fires the man who owns the switch, the lesson doesn't arrive as words. It arrives as silence. And when the silence starts, it spreads fast. After the termination email, I waited. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to see how far confidence could carry someone without understanding. 2 days passed, then 3. No calls, no legal notices, just silence. That told me everything. They believed they had won. They believed the system now belonged to them, simply because I was no longer invited into the building. On the 4th day, a meeting invite appeared on my calendar. Transition discussion. No agenda. No preparation notes. That kind of meeting is never about discussion. It is about pressure. I joined on time, calm, clean shirt, neutral background. On the screen were people who had never built anything with their hands. Procurement, legal, operations managers who only knew the system through colored indicators, and the CEO, sitting back, relaxed, already bored. She spoke like this was routine. They needed full access, full code, full control, for continuity, for business stability. I let her finish. Then I said one sentence. You are ending access to a system you do not own. The room changed, not loudly, subtly. She smiled and corrected me. They paid for development. That meant ownership. She said it like a rule everyone knows. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I reminded her of the contract she never read closely. Lease of use. No transfer. No duplication. No internalization. The words were clear. They always are. Silence followed. People started scrolling, reading, realizing. That was the moment they understood there was no handover coming. I told them I would provide everything they were legally entitled to receive. Interface documents, user-level materials, nothing beneath that layer. They ended the call quickly after that. No goodbyes, no threats. That night, I walked into my workshop and powered up the control panel. Every light was green, every node responding. The network was alive and healthy. 20 minutes away, an entire freight corridor depended on signals flowing through hardware they didn't know existed. The next morning, I went to my usual diner. Same seat, same coffee. I opened my laptop and watched the system run. Trucks moving, docks cycling, traffic adapting. At 2:45 p.m., a message arrived. Confusion, access problems, login issues. I didn't reply. 2 minutes later, I flipped the master relay. Not a shutdown, a disconnect. Clean, silent, no alarms, no crashes. The system didn't fail, it simply stopped listening. For a few minutes, nothing looked wrong. Dashboards stayed green, schedules looked normal, but reality began drifting away from the screen. Lights froze, trucks stacked, docks double-booked. I watched it unfold without emotion. This wasn't revenge yet, this was demonstration. By the time the emails started flooding in, the gap between what they saw and what was happening was already too wide to close quickly. And the more they tried to fix it from the interface, the worse it became. The first messages were polite, questions framed as favors, small issues that assumed cooperation, dock delays, route data not updating, signals behaving strangely, people who still believed this was a minor glitch. I ignored them all. 10 minutes later, the tone changed. Subject lines gained urgency. Words like critical and immediate appeared. Phones started ringing. Different numbers. Same panic. I watched the system logs instead. Connection requests hitting empty endpoints. Internal teams trying to restart what they didn't control. Every attempt made the situation worse because the interface kept lying to them. It showed stability while reality collapsed. That kind of mismatch destroys organizations faster than outright failure. By mid-afternoon, the freight corridor was choking. Trucks waited at intersections that never changed. Warehouses argued with drivers whose systems showed valid assignments that conflicted with physical space. Dispatchers shouted instructions that contradicted each other. Compliance timers kept ticking. Fines don't care about confusion. Somewhere in a glass office, executives stared at screens that still showed green. That's the danger of believing indicators instead of systems. When the first legal voicemail came in, I listened. Not to the words, but to the breathing. Controlled fear. They knew now, they just didn't know how bad it was yet. I opened a blank document and started writing calmly. Emergency restoration terms, clear pricing, immediate payment, no negotiations, no ownership changes, just access restored under strict conditions. I sent it to every address I had. Legal, finance, operations, leadership. Then I ordered another coffee. Minutes later, the emergency call arrived. No greetings, no authority left, just urgency. They wanted solutions. They wanted timelines. They wanted control back. I explained it slowly, using simple words. The system was mine. Access had ended. Restoration required agreement. Someone accused me of sabotage. I didn't react. Sabotage destroys. I preserved. The system was healthy. They chose to disconnect from it. That distinction matters in court. It matters in business. It matters in power. Silence followed. Then payment discussions. Then internal arguing they forgot to mute. Eventually, the decision came back. Wire transfer initiated. I checked my account. Waited. When the confirmation arrived, I stood up and walked to the workshop. I flipped the relay back on. One switch. That was it. The network woke up instantly. Data flowing. Signals correcting. Routes recalculating. Trucks moving again as if nothing had happened. I returned to the call and said it was done. No celebration, no apology, just restored function. They thanked me like people thank firemen after watching smoke fill the building. The call ended quickly. After that day, nobody spoke casually anymore. New contracts arrived through different names, different titles, higher numbers, stronger language. My ownership was no longer questioned. And the CEO, who thought access meant control, was quietly removed from the process. No announcement, no explanation, just absence. That's how real consequences work. Not loud, not public, just permanent. For the next 2 days, I stayed close to the system. Not because I expected failure, but because recovery reveals more than collapse. When pressure lifts, habits surface. The network ran clean. No errors, no drift. The same people who panicked before now moved carefully, quietly, as if afraid to touch anything. Emails arrived from departments that had never contacted me before. Risk management, insurance, strategy, all polite, all indirect. No one used the CEO's name. That silence told me more than any apology could. On the third morning, a new message came in. Different sender, higher title. The tone was respectful, almost cautious. They wanted a long-term arrangement, exclusive access, better pay, clear boundaries. They acknowledged ownership without saying the word mistake. I read it once and closed it. Then I opened a new document and wrote my terms. Simpler than before, harder to misread. Ownership reaffirmed. Emergency pricing fixed. Termination rules explicit. No gray zones. When you remove ambiguity, power stops shifting unexpectedly. They signed without edits. No negotiations, no comments, just signatures. That never happens unless fear is still fresh. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt confirmation. The system worked. Not just the logistics system, but the structure around it. When people understand consequences, behavior aligns quickly. Words spread. Quietly. Not through marketing. Through calls that began with careful questions. Companies nearby, different cities, same problem. They all asked the same thing in different ways. Are you available? I knew what they meant. Are you the one? I didn't answer immediately. Scarcity matters. Control matters. That week, I declined 2 offers and accepted 1 meeting. Not to sell, to listen. Power isn't about how much you take. It's about choosing when not to. Back in my workshop, the control panel hummed steadily. Green lights across the board. I looked at it the way a mechanic looks at an engine he built himself. Calm, familiar, alive. The lesson from all of this was simple. Companies don't fail because of bad people. They fail because confident people mistake visibility for control. Dashboards feel powerful. Titles feel permanent, until they aren't. The man who owns the switch doesn't need to raise his voice. He just needs to know when to let the silence speak. I never told them I was the only one who could fix it. I never had to. They learned it themselves, minute by minute, while the gap between their screens and reality grew wider. That gap is where authority dies. After that, my life didn't change much. Same diner, same coffee, same workshop. But something shifted underneath. When my phone rang now, it wasn't with demands. It was with questions asked carefully. Respect doesn't come from fear alone. It comes from memory. And they remembered. A week later, things finally slowed down. Not because the situation was forgotten, but because it had been absorbed. Companies do that. They bury events inside procedures, new titles, and revised policies, pretending the shock never happened. Internally, Apex adjusted fast. New approval layers, more legal reviews, fewer bold decisions. The system kept running, and that was all they wanted. Stability becomes the only goal after chaos. I stayed invisible on purpose. I answered questions when required. I delivered exactly what the contract demanded, nothing extra. People who survive close calls don't want heroes. They want predictability. One afternoon, an email arrived from someone I hadn't heard from in years. An operations director from another freight group. Short message, no small talk. Heard about Memphis, need help. That was it. No explanations, no details, just recognition. I replied with a single line. Availability limited. That phrase does more work than any pitch deck. Over the next few days, similar messages came in. Different cities, same tone. Careful, measured. They weren't shopping for software. They were shopping for certainty. That's what experience sells when reputation spreads the right way. I took one call, off the record. No names, no commitments. I listened. Same pattern. New leadership, cost-cutting. Systems no one truly understood. I told him the same thing I tell everyone. I don't sell systems. I build them and keep control. Silence followed. Then agreement. People don't argue when they already know the ending. After the call, I sat in the workshop longer than usual. Not working, just thinking. About how often skill is invisible until it's removed. About how organizations confuse dependency with ownership. About how easy it is to destroy trust and how hard it is to rebuild it. I didn't feel anger toward the CEO who started this. I felt distance. She wasn't reckless. She was confident without depth. That's common. Dangerous, but common. The real damage wasn't the shutdown. It was the assumption that someone else's system could be absorbed without consequence. That belief kills more companies than competitors ever do. Later that night, I updated my standard agreement. Not longer, clearer, plain language, simple rules. I removed anything that could be misread by someone skimming instead of thinking. Contracts aren't protection against bad intent. They are protection against bad assumptions. When I finished, I saved the file and shut down my laptop. Outside, the workshop lights reflected softly off the metal panel. Everything steady, everything under control. I slept well that night, not because I had won, but because nothing was unresolved. Uncertainty is exhausting. Resolution is quiet. And quiet is where people like me operate best. 2 weeks after the incident, the story finally reached me the way stories always do. Not directly, through fragments, a comment during a call, a pause before a question, someone lowering their voice even though nobody else could hear. People in logistics talk, but they don't gossip. They compare damage. I learned that the CEO had been sidelined completely. Officially, she was still employed. Practically, she had no authority. Decisions went around her. Emails stopped including her. Her name became something people avoided saying. That's how companies punish mistakes they can't admit publicly. I didn't celebrate. I filed it away as information. Knowing where power moved mattered more than knowing who lost it. My role shifted quietly. No longer a vendor, not an employee. Something between infrastructure and insurance. When problems appeared, they didn't ask for fixes. They asked for permission. That difference changes tone instantly. I kept communication short, precise, boring. Boring builds trust. Excitement breaks systems. During one late afternoon call, an operations manager asked me how close they had come to a full collapse. I answered honestly, closer than they realized. The interface would have kept showing green, while the real world fell apart. They would have blamed drivers, weather, each other. By the time they questioned the system itself, the damage would have been permanent. He went quiet after that. Fear doesn't always show as panic. Sometimes it shows as understanding. After the call, I walked outside and checked my phone. 3 new emails, all similar. Requests for availability, requests for consultation, requests that carefully avoided asking for ownership. People learn fast when the lesson is expensive. I accepted one project and declined the rest. Not because I couldn't handle more work, but because leverage fades when you spread yourself thin. Scarcity keeps conversations honest. The new project started the same way Apex once had. Broken coordination, conflicting tools, confident managers. The difference was attitude. They listened. They asked what I needed, not what they could take. That was the Memphis effect. It followed me quietly. At home, nothing changed. Same routine, same hours, same workshop. I don't collect trophies. I collect stability. When you work with systems long enough, you stop enjoying drama. Drama is just noise between failure points. That night, I reviewed the logs one last time. Everything normal. Everything aligned. I shut down the screens and sat in the dark for a moment. There's a strange peace in knowing that chaos only appears when someone flips a switch they don't own, and that as long as you understand where the real switches are, you don't need to threaten anyone. You just need to wait. The interesting part came later, when the fear wore off and curiosity replaced it. That's when people start asking the wrong questions again. Not from Apex, but from others. How exactly did it work? Where was the system really hosted? Could something similar be replicated internally? I heard these questions secondhand, passed along by people who trusted me enough to warn me. I didn't interfere. Curiosity isn't dangerous by itself. Overconfidence is, and overconfidence needs time to rebuild before it makes another mistake. Apex stayed quiet, too quiet. When companies stop asking questions, it usually means lawyers are talking instead. I expected a letter, a claim, a threat wrapped in formal language. It never came. Legal teams don't like fights they can't simplify, and this one couldn't be simplified without exposing how badly leadership failed. Silence was cheaper. Months passed. The system kept running. I received payments exactly on schedule. No delays, no disputes. That's another form of apology companies prefer. One evening, while updating documentation for a different client, I noticed something familiar, the same kind of overconfidence. A manager explaining a system by pointing at charts instead of processes. I stopped him gently and asked one question. Who owns the logic? He didn't answer immediately. He looked confused. That pause told me everything. I declined the project the next morning. Walking away is a skill most people never learn. The more reputation you gain, the more important it becomes. Not every opportunity is worth the exposure. Meanwhile, the Memphis system became invisible again, which is the highest compliment infrastructure can receive. No news, no praise, no attention, just movement. Goods arriving, trucks leaving, time behaving normally. That's what control actually looks like. Not recognition, not credit, just absence of failure. I kept my routines unchanged on purpose. Same diner, same seat, same coffee. Familiar places remind you who you are when leverage grows. One afternoon, the waitress asked why I was smiling at my screen. I told her work was behaving. She nodded like she understood. People who deal with real work usually do. That night, I reviewed my service agreements again. Not to tighten them, but to simplify them further. Fewer words, clear limits, clear consequences. Power doesn't need decoration. It needs clarity. The biggest lie in business is that control comes from authority. It doesn't. It comes from understanding dependencies, from knowing which piece stops the whole machine when it's removed. Most people don't want that responsibility. They want the appearance of control without the weight. I've learned to recognize that pattern early. It saves time. It saves energy. It saves systems. And if someone insists on learning the hard way, I don't stop them anymore. I just make sure the lesson is accurate. Time has a way of smoothing sharp edges, but it also locks in lessons. By the time a quarter passed, the Memphis incident had turned into internal policy. New checklists, new approval chains, new language around external dependencies. I could see it in the emails. The tone was cautious, almost careful, like people walking on ice they know can crack. Nobody tried to renegotiate ownership again. Nobody asked for copies. They had learned that curiosity without authority is expensive. I stayed deliberately boring. I answered only what was asked. I never volunteered insight unless it was required. Silence, used correctly, creates more respect than expertise ever will. One afternoon, I received a forwarded message by mistake. Internal thread. Someone asking why the system couldn't be duplicated so they could reduce risk. The reply came from legal. Short. Final. Risk is lower when we don't provoke the person who controls it. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. Fear had turned into policy. Not personal fear, institutional fear. That's the kind that lasts. Around the same time, a recruiter reached out. High-paying offer, big title, executive role, oversight of multiple regions. I declined without discussion. Titles dilute leverage. Employment creates dependence. I prefer the opposite. The system doesn't care about my title. It responds to my decisions. That's enough. Another company tried a softer approach. Partnership, equity, shared control. They spoke slowly, choosing words carefully, pretending not to want too much. I listened and declined politely. Shared control only works when both sides understand the cost of mistakes. Most don't. At home, I made small improvements to the control panel. Nothing urgent, just refinements, better redundancy, cleaner switching paths. Systems should evolve even when they aren't under threat, especially then. Late one night, I thought about how easily this could have gone differently. If I had argued, if I had warned, if I had tried to explain, none of that would have worked. People who believe they control something don't hear explanations. They hear resistance. The only language they understand is consequence, not punishment, consequence. When actions produce results they didn't expect, learning happens automatically. That's why I never raised my voice, never threatened, never gloated. I let the system speak, and it spoke clearly. The world doesn't run on confidence. It runs on dependencies. Once you see that, you stop chasing approval. You stop competing for credit. You build quietly. You own quietly. And when someone forgets where the real control lives, you don't remind them with words. You let the silence do it for you. By the end of the year, the noise was completely gone. No questions, no probing, no curiosity disguised as strategy. Apex operated the way disciplined organizations do after surviving a near miss. Slowly, carefully, with memory. I became part of the background, which is exactly where I prefer to be. Systems work best when their architects are invisible. One morning, I received a short update from operations. No issues, no incidents, compliance clean, deliveries on time. Messages like that are worth more than praise. They mean nothing broke, and nothing breaking is success. I saved the email and closed it. Around that time, I noticed a pattern in the requests I still received from outside companies. Nobody asked for miracles anymore. Nobody asked for shortcuts. They asked for resilience. They asked for systems that couldn't be misunderstood. That shift mattered. The Memphis incident had become a quiet case study, shared verbally, never written down. People learn more from stories they aren't allowed to tell publicly. I was careful not to confirm anything. Reputation works best when it's indirect. At the diner, someone once asked what I did for a living. I said I help things move when they stop. That was enough. Later that week, I revisited the contract one last time. Not to change it, but to confirm something. It didn't protect me because it was clever. It protected me because it was honest. Clear ownership, clear limits, clear consequences. No emotional language, no ego, just structure. That's what most people miss. They think power comes from complexity. It doesn't. It comes from clarity. Complexity hides weakness. Clarity exposes it. I shut down the laptop and looked around the workshop. The control panel hummed softly. The lights were steady. Everything was doing exactly what it was designed to do. That's the goal. Not domination, not revenge, alignment. When every part knows its role, nothing needs to be forced. The CEO who triggered all of this never reached out again. I don't know where she ended up. It doesn't matter. People who mistake authority for control always land somewhere else eventually. The system remains. That's what endures. I poured another cup of coffee and sat quietly, thinking about how many disasters start with someone believing they are smarter than the structure holding them up. I've seen it enough times to know how it ends. The man who owns the switch doesn't need to announce it. He just needs to keep it where it belongs. People often ask what the lesson is, as if stories like this are puzzles meant to be solved. They aren't. They're mirrors. What happened wasn't rare or dramatic. It was ordinary. A company depended on something it didn't understand. A leader believed authority replaced knowledge. A system did exactly what it was designed to do when control was removed. Nothing emotional, nothing personal, just cause and effect. Over time, Apex became stable again. New processes, new language, safer decisions. They stopped trying to own what they didn't build and focused on using what worked. That's maturity, even if it comes late. I stayed where I've always been, outside the org chart, outside the politics, close to the switches that matter. I didn't gain fame from this. I gained precision. Every future conversation became shorter. Every agreement became clearer. People stopped testing boundaries because they already knew where they were. That's the quiet advantage of letting consequences teach instead of explanations. In my line of work, the goal isn't to be irreplaceable. That creates noise. The goal is to be misunderstood only once. After that, behavior changes. The diner didn't change. The workshop didn't change. My routines stayed the same. The only difference was how carefully people spoke when my name came up. Not with fear, with accuracy. Accuracy is respect without emotion. That's the kind that lasts. If there's one thing to take from this, it's simple. Control doesn't come from access. Access is temporary. Control comes from ownership, from design, from understanding how things fail when you're not there. Most people don't want that responsibility. They want results without weight, until the moment weight shows up. When it does, they look for the person who built the foundation, not the one who managed the surface. I never told anyone I could stop their operation. I never needed to. The system made that clear on its own. And once a system speaks, people listen differently. That's how it should be. Quiet, precise, final.